Hello, and welcome to our Elevated Frequency podcast. We are episode 32, and this episode is all about the power of mindset in transforming our health and our life. And I'm here with my lovely co-founder, Lisa Kirby. Hello.
Hello, Miss Shannon.
Hello, Miss Lisa. We haven't had the opportunity to have our chat with just Lisa and myself in a while. So I've missed it. I'm excited to get back into it. And this topic feels very appropriate for this week, and it feels long overdue. And so for those of you who are not aware that we implement mindset into our programs in a very big way, this will give you a little bit of insight about how do we do that. So Lise, what do we have on the docket today?
We have really just discussing, giving a working definition of what mindset is to kick off, but then absolutely kind of sharing some of the biggest blocks that we see with our clients coming in. Oh my God, there is a random dog in our backyard. Hello. Okay. All kinds of things happening here. So discussing the blocks that we see with our clients coming in, the most common ones, which is always really interesting as a coach because it can be triggering and kind of bring things up for ourselves and thinking about our own journeys and transformations. And we've been there. I mean, that's what's really fascinating about so much of this. And really sharing kind of, the why behind why we're including so much mindset support in our 12-week program. So Shan, when you think of mindset or that term comes up for you, what is your kind of working definition?
Well, I think the term mindset is used in many different ways. My relationship to that word mindset is awareness of our thoughts and having space between what we think and who we are. So mindset to me is that you are not your thoughts, but you are aware of your thoughts. And it's the modalities that we use to bring further awareness into our thoughts or our mindset that's just thus creating our experience or our reality, as you've shared earlier today. That would be my working experience with that terminology. What about you, Lise?
I love that. It's so clear and it's not sciencey and it's just very direct. Do you feel like you've always kind of had that sense of the awareness of the separation between kind of who's running the machine and then noticing the thoughts?
That is a really fun question. Honestly, I think I go in and out. I can't really say if when I was younger, if I was aware that there was multiple voices happening in our head, but definitely in the last 15 years, I am very aware that there is a conversation. Oops, Lisa's frozen. We're going to see. Oh, you're not frozen anymore. We're back. Definitely in the last 15 years, I am hyper aware that there are multiple voices. And that's been really fascinating because then when we're able to get a little bit of space between the story that our mind is telling us and what's happening in reality, it allows us to choose a new thought, which is really where freedom comes in. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, I didn't really hear the term or really think about it until probably my early 30s. But I think that my first exposure to just the power of your thoughts, and which essentially is, what's the running script, the stories, the mindset that's kind of playing in our brain. When I heard Dr. Joe Dispenza speak in person, this must have been, honestly, it was 1990. No. It was, I was in college. Okay. So early 2000s.
Wow. Yeah.
Or he came and he did a live workshop at our non-denominational church that we would go to. And I was mind blown because no pun intended, but here's this doctor, this coming in and telling his story about how the power of the mind and his thoughts and healing his back after this crazy,
Mm.
trauma that he had and injury that he had, and how he like printed out this map of all of the nerves and muscles in his back, and he would just meditate and focus on healing
Mm.
every day, and he was able to walk, and everything that the doctor said, like, oh, this is like, you're never going to walk again, and he just blew everything out of the water. So
Yeah.
that was kind of like my tiptoe into, wait, what? I'm sorry.
Mhm.
What? Like, we have the power to potentially like alter our reality. And
Yes.
that kind of led me down the path of Abraham Hicks, which
Mm.
I think is a very just easy kind of focus on something that feels better. It's
Yeah.
very basic level thought work. And then, the older I got, the deeper I've learned and gotten into it, and really starting to be aware of the deeper scripts.
Mhm.
So I had an easier time with identifying some of the mindset or thoughts that would pop up that didn't really serve me. But it's some of the really deep stuff that you develop, come to
Mhm.
find when you're a child,
Mhm.
that you may not really be aware of at all.
Yes.
Those moments of like those aha moments when you do the work and you find these triggers and you're like, oh my God, this has been playing
Mhm.
for so long.
Mhm.
And you just wonder how that has impacted your life all these years.
Oh my gosh, it's wild. For those of you who are just joining, we're talking about mindset, and we're just kind of getting into like Lisa and my background and our understanding of mindset. Lisa, what you just made me remember, you made me remember this. What I just remembered based on what you were saying is that when I was younger, I was raised Christian Scientist, right? Which is basically the whole methodology is that you can heal the body with the mind.
Mhm.
So that was like my baseline upbringing. I remember going, well, if that's the case, I can change my eye color. So I was like, green eyes, green eyes, green eyes. And we're still working on that. There is
Yeah.
a little bit of green in there, by the way, the base. But that was a part of my upbringing. But I think that the belief there, and then bringing some space between our thoughts and our stories, are two, they're kind of a separate kind of thing. And that would kind of bring me into that. I feel like we have multiple voices that are happening. We have voices that are so deeply rooted that we are so unconscious of them. And
Yes.
only when you really have someone who's there, who was not in your upbringing sometimes, can they reflect back how misaligned that might be, especially for where you want to go. Um, Inside of that, there was something that you were saying too about when we have the opportunity to realize this story, because stories are so powerful for us. But when we have a story that is running unconsciously and we're not aware of it and it's running our life, when we have access to it and all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, I love this visual. I say it's like opening up the refrigerator door to see the Grand Canyon inside. Right? Because you're like, oh my gosh, how long has that been there?
Yes.
That's been there the whole time. How has that affected every area of my life? Why didn't anyone tell me?
Yes.
And then there's like this whole access point that is available when we're able to go, oh my gosh, that there's this story that's there. So, Lisa, you want to talk about like essentially, yeah, you guys, we see this with clients when they first start, and we're especially with our groups, because we'll have kind of the group shared belief in some way, shape, or form, especially generationally.
Mhm.
So, Lise, what are some of the things that you've noticed with individuals as you've watched kind of these groups of, right now we're in a women's group and we're running a women's group, but what are some of the generational beliefs that you've seen kind of with some of the women right now, things that you can think of?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And the groups are really this powerful awareness moment for us as coaches too, because so many are having them at the same time. So it really gives us a good sense of what's coming up for the collective, which is really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm going to say might be a little triggering, trigger warning. What I really feel like is happening, because we've been in this conversation for so long and we've seen what has kind of come out of, women our age. So somewhere between, 30s to 50s, I would say, maybe even
Mm-hmm.
older. A lot of us were exposed to some really intense, like, body shaming. And if you grew up in the 90s and you remember Us magazine and
Mm-hmm.
what was literally considered the acceptable body composition of the day were women who were anorexic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, truly malnutrition and not well.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the aesthetic of the day in the 90s. So
Mm-hmm.
when we think about, not only for us as children, but for our moms, I know my mom was always on a diet, always. From the time I remember consciously having thoughts, I remember mom's on a diet.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of women can relate to that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but what I see, the shift that has now happened, is for those of us who kind of grew up there and are now shifting into us as adults, we've
Mm-hmm.
kind of moved, we've become like, whoa, we're so aware that that was not great. You know,
Mm.
those were not great messages. Not
Right.
great is putting it lightly, but that was like really harmful.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've kind of shifted to this other place, but I feel like this obsession with perfection has a new outfit.
Yes.
Now it's turned into,
Mm-hmm.
instead of like an obsession maybe with weight loss, it's
Mm-hmm.
turned into an obsession with living a perfect life,
Mm.
toxin free, and everything's going to kill you. And we have to control every variable because the world is not a safe place anymore.
Mm.
And I know I can say this because I've been there in the last,
Mm.
like, 5, 6 years. I've gone through that rabbit hole. And then, as I mentioned in the group channel today, I'm like, what's also toxic is stressing so much about toxins that you
Mhm.
create dis-ease in the body because of the power of your thoughts.
Yes. Yep.
So it's really just, it was, what I see is kind of like this pendulum swing from one thing to the other.
Mm.
And when I was in the thick of it, I wasn't aware. And
Mhm.
so when I started to pull back a little bit and analyze my thoughts and how that impacted just the amount of fear in my physical body every day from being in that state, I was like, whoa, this is not okay either.
Right.
Um,
There's a oh,
yeah, go ahead.
there's a question in there. So because what your experience with your mom was very typical for that time.
Yes.
And so we have a lot of females in the same age group, just in like a 15 to 20 year span where their mothers were going through that experience. So from an undertone, what can you see is the message that's being given to children in that era
Oh gosh.
based on that behavior?
I would say, well, I can't really speak for, I had two brothers, or I have two brothers. Speak for their experience, but as looking to my mom as the only other female in the house,
Mhm.
the message I perceived was like, the female body isn't working properly.
Mm.
If mom needs to always be eating something different,
Mhm.
and here I am looking at my brothers and my dad just like shoveling food down, like can't get it fast enough. They're always hungry.
Mhm.
While my mom was always, eating chicken and weird cabbage soup diets, or, you know what I mean? Like, she was never doing what we were doing or eating what we were eating.
Yes. So there's an undertone there that I'm just kind of thinking about and hearing. And the undertone, and let me see if this resonates for you, is that as the mom, I'm not okay as I am.
Yes. Yep.
And what's interesting is that this pendulum swing feels like it's going from a modeling for women, at least in this conversation, for men as well, but in this conversation for women, I'm not okay as I am. And thus I have to do things that are different than everyone else in my family to be okay.
Yeah.
Now it feels like the direction is actually external. So people are disregarding what they need for themselves and they're putting it on everything else isn't okay.
Yes.
And thus I need to change my behavior because everything else now isn't safe. And before it was like my body isn't operating properly. So I need to do certain different things and restrict and prescribe and listen to external sources. And now it's almost like the pendulum swing is, okay, I'm going to listen to external sources because everything is out to get me.
Yes.
And I think when we come back to that source of mindset, what's missing in both of those equations, and we keep coming back to this, and this is why half of our program is about mindset, is because most of us will have these unconscious stories that we've been holding in our system. And they're not just from us, they're from our mother and from our grandmother and from their grandmother. And it's this conscious or unconscious storyline around survival and self care and food, abundance, financial strategies that have been passed down. And then we are holding them in our body, whether we are aware of them or not. So starting in week 6 or earlier, like with our group right now, we're like, well, here we are. We're going to start nice and early. We're essentially going, if there's an emotion that is triggering for you, what is the thought that's attached to that emotion? And what we got to experience today was that there was a general understanding, a general mindset that the way that they were learning to balance nutrition wasn't sustainable. Because in their mind, there was a story that if they are eating in balance and if they're seeing progress, they can no longer eat out, they can no longer enjoy food, they can no longer do all of these things. But we go, is that true? Because
Right.
nobody told you not to do that.
Right. And it's like, then it makes me think of, well, where did that come from? And it probably came from our, this last generation.
Right. Or their earlier experiences with, diets and diet culture and just the bombardment from our microcosm and macrocosm of influence. So neighbors, school we went to, social media, the magazines that you're talking about. And it's so wild to kind of just, it feels like getting like a little wedge in. I actually feel like we have two thoughts and I'm like, can I just get in there really quick and just like shove that one out of the way and go, look, we don't need you anymore. We're going to
Yes.
move into how does your body feel?
Yes. Oh my God.
And so this is what, for those of you who are listening or interested in this conversation, we say that we can give people all of the science, but if they're still operating with unconscious beliefs and behavior patterns, that none of their science will stick. This is why if you just go to class and you go to a nutrition class, guess what? Maybe some of you are going to actually be able to apply that. Most of you will be operating beliefs that you're not even aware of. And you're generally not going to be aware of them until you have someone who is going to mirror that you have that belief and mirror it back to you and go, are you aware that that's there?
Yes.
And then they'll be like, oh, okay, wait a second.
So, and just to give like a concrete example and why I'm obsessed with what we do. I can't stop thinking about it. I mean, it's like 24/7. I'm just so grateful for the opportunity that we have, because it really does open up this doorway to a path of awareness and a level of consciousness and expansion and growth that might not have been available before. And that's kind of what we were talking about before we hopped on, is that when you have a lot of these limiting beliefs, it literally limits your life, because you kind of create this little confined world of how you can grow, what you can do, what you have access to, what you have resources for. So I remember right before I met you, Shan, I was doing the Whole30 and very much, in this mindset, in that pendulum swing. We had just come out of the 90s. We're like, fat was bad. So it's always one thing that gets demonized.
Mhm.
Now it's like kale and vegetables, and it's red meat sometimes. There's always something, and it's now it's kind of comical to me. But anyway, we had just come off of like fat is evil, and so everything was like snack wells and low fat, and it all had high sugar. And then oopsies, now we figured out that was also not a great strategy to just eat really high carb, high sugar diets and have really low fat. Now everyone's hormones are messed up. So now I'm doing Whole30 where it's like fat's back again. I just went back just for fun. I was tracking my food the other day just to support a client, camaraderie. And I looked back at my first food logs from 2018, and I wrote just diaries of notes, and I kept it everything, and I logged it. I was like bacon, ground beef, cooked in coconut oil. Like I was just like, yes, all the fats, right? Because I'm like, fats are good. Fats don't make you fat.
Healthy fats, yeah.
Healthy fats don't make you fat. And I love fat. I am a huge fan of it. I have no problem eating fat. And it's like lost in all this conversation is what you're saying. How does that make you feel after you eat that meal?
Yeah.
Right? Like bringing it back to, I felt horrible. I was having like 60 grams of fat, maybe more at one meal. And then digestion was just like, ugh. And I was drinking wine, that was not, I was like, I'm doing Whole30 and drinking wine. So bringing that awareness in and working with you, it was such an aha moment of like, wow, I just took that thought and turned it into a belief, like a thought that we think over and over. And then it became my mindset, like, oh, it doesn't matter how much I eat, as long as it's this, then it's okay. And so we see that a lot with, I'm eating clean, or I've cut out gluten, or I only eat organic. And it's like, that's great. And how does it make you feel? And then amount and quantity still matter. It will always matter.
Absolutely. And I love what you're pointing to with that, is because, and this is what we were talking about before we went live here, that there is currently this separation that we're noticing, especially for individuals who come in to work with us and they've come from any sort of like previous diet culture where they've tried so hard to get a result in their body, and they either keep ping ponging or what they did in the past doesn't work anymore. So they kind of show up at our doorstep, like kind of had tried all the things. And what's interesting to notice is that as they go into it, they're kind of taking our word as God, you know, and taking it and holding on to it so tightly and saying, okay, well, you said this. And then that is kind of, they're taking that as their kite string. And when I say that, to put it into practical terms, it's like, for example, we look to have a focus of protein at our meals. For the reason that we can't store protein effectively for later, it can't be used as energy in the way that carbohydrates and fat can. So we can't like make up the protein we missed earlier on the day at night if we didn't have enough protein. So with that, we're really inviting everyone to kind of look at going protein forward, like think of where that's going to come from first. And then some individuals who are vegetarian or carnivore or have aversions to different types of meats, a texture thing, they're going into it going like, well, I guess it's got to have to look like ground turkey or chicken breast with rice and broccoli,
No
and,
seasoning.
yeah. And I get that. I get that picture. I get that marketing.
Yeah.
I can see where that idea came from, which is fine. So now what we get to help people to do, and this is where the mindset component comes in, is we're going, okay, that's there. So let's look at what we actually are looking to do here. And what we're actually looking to do is to give the knowledge, the science. This is what's happening. Now let's turn the lens this way and go, how does my body, how are the sensations in my body responding to this thing that I'm doing? And for the most part, what's interesting right now is that we have people noticing certain things. it's almost like certain sensations are bubbling up. Like
Mhm.
the ones where I'm like, oh, I do have more energy. Wait a second, I didn't realize that. And I just realized that I didn't have a headache. Oh my God, like that's happening. And I'm sleeping better and I'm seeing weight loss and my bra is fitting differently. And so they're noticing all of those things, but they may not be totally connected yet to whether their food is feeling nourishing for them.
Mm.
And I
Yes.
think that is the space that we as a culture, especially in America, haven't been taught to do this. And we talk about this all the time. But when we think about mindset, it's like acknowledging that there is a thought, but then what does your body say?
Yes.
Like, what are the sensations that your body is giving you? And sometimes that sensation is going to be like, I don't know. And if the sensation is, I don't know, which is fine, there's some more work to be done there, in my
Yes.
experience. Because if we numb something, it's either through complete underuse, like if it's a physiological response, like the hormone ghrelin, we can turn off this hunger hormone if we're not just eating regularly. And then we're kind of like, but I'm not hungry. And it's like, well, a certain hormone isn't able to do its job because you taught it not to. And so we can kind of think about things like that. But then also, if we're looking at even the emotional response that might be there, that we're not really giving ourselves the moment to just allow ourselves to feel it, and instead we feel numb to it, I
Mm.
feel like that's further an opportunity to go, okay, well, if I'm numb here, like what's that also? Um, which that numbness can also present as super friendly,
Mm.
or kind of deflective.
Yes.
And so there's a lot to be discovered within these conversations. And I think what's really this area that people who come to work with us aren't super conscious of is that when they think about nutrition, most people, not all, some people are very aware that there's a whole mindset component that's emotional. It comes from their parents. Like there's this whole work we're going to be doing. But often people seem to come in and then go like, oh, well, we don't have to talk about that here.
Yes.
And what we want to say to you guys is that there's no way to avoid that conversation here, because how you interact with something that supports your survival is going to be paramount for you surviving, for you like feeling good in your body, for you thriving, like how you actually are able to deeply tune into your body and go, what is my body telling me? What do I need right now? Am I in alignment with that? Is this nourishing to me? Am I at peace with this decision?
Yes.
Then we get to kind of move into those aspects. And that's where a lot of the huge transformations come. It's not through just tracking macronutrients.
No, no. And I often find that the clients who say like, oh, I'm good. Like I don't have any weird, eating beliefs. I didn't grow up with anything weird. I'm like, is that not to say like weird, it's everyone's judgment of how that experience was is relative. But I
Mm,
almost feel like if you're not even willing to just take a peek
mm, mhm,
at what might be there,
mhm,
that to me is kind of a flag of like that might be even more of a reason to kind
mm,
of just look at it.
mhm.
And because sometimes we can build a wall so thick, um, and dissociate and just be so far removed from that awareness, that we don't want to touch it.
Yes.
And for various reasons, but
Mhm.
it's worth I feel like it's worth excavating. I think of us as like little archaeologists, like what's under here,
Yeah.
and just some of the common examples of beliefs, mindset that we have around food could be the ones we were talking about earlier. If we saw a parent or loved one on a diet, or maybe our friends, but also like maybe a common one is like finish your plate. And
Mm,
that really comes from when I talked about this with my parents, which is an exercise in our 12-week course.
mhm.
asking your parents, like, what's your relationship with food?
Mhm.
Two totally different answers from my parents. But a lot of that stemmed from their parents,
Mhm.
came out of the Great Depression,
Mhm.
a lot of and world wars where there food scarcity was this massive thing.
Yes.
And so I'm like, "Oh my god," that was my first aha light bulb moment because that had passed down the generations to me, not just with food. Then you start realizing, "Oh my gosh, it was with money too."
Yes.
But starting with food, the message was, "You finish your plate.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
finish your plate because someone somewhere doesn't have food."
Even
And
if you're not
what
hungry.
even if you're not hungry.
Yeah.
And what that teaches you is to dissociate further from your body and your body signals of feeling full. So
Mhm.
my first kind of light bulb moment was I have been overeating
Mhm.
past a normal level of fullness. Like my sense of full was
Mhm.
unbutton your pants and sit on the couch since I was a child.
Mm.
So we ate fast, we
Mhm.
ate high volume, and
Mhm.
then it was very uncomfortable. So I've always been trying to replicate that sense of like physical fullness. And it's
Mm.
taken years, in my late
Yeah.
30s to train my body of like, no, this is what a normal amount of food is for your stomach
Mhm. Mhm.
without like, causing literally physical pain.
Yeah. Wow. And Lise, I love that you're bringing that up because I think so many people can relate to that.
Yeah.
And so for those of you who are listening now or in the future, if you haven't ever like just had a conversation with your parents about like, hey, what's your relationship to food? Or what was it like when we were growing up? Because this is what I remember and I'm just curious. And just without needing to correct them or judge them for anything, just out of curiosity, just kind of understanding what chemistry was in the tree that you sprouted from in that area of your life, it can be so informative to understand where these tendencies and characteristics for your behavior have come from in this one area so that you can get a little bit of space from it to decide if you still want to do that thing.
Yes.
And for Lise, what you're saying, I mean, there's so many layers to that experience on its own because I can imagine, and we've talked about this prior, but I can imagine there's a physiological feeling, of course, that now you're associating with like getting enough, being okay, you're doing what your family's doing, like all of these things. So I'm okay if I'm too full.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like the hormonal interaction that would come with that. And then perhaps like the high and low hormonal reaction that would come with that. And that being almost like a normal experience. Um, and then training your body out of that,
Oh my gosh. Yes.
which is no small feat.
It's not. And that's where we have to really give ourselves grace that when you think about how long have you been eating in a way that hasn't been serving you,
Mhm,
and then the amount of time that you're retraining your physical body, your
mhm.
mind, all the things to kind of eat in this new way, we have
Yeah.
to give ourselves grace that, sometimes we are going to go back to some old habits and
Mhm,
you're still making progress because you're staying in the conversation, you're still working at it, and just knowing that it's like riding a bike for the first time. You're not going to give up because you fell off. It's like you just get back up on that bike. We're
yes.
you're retraining something that really should be so innate and
Right.
natural.
Yeah, but if it wasn't part of your very earliest years of upbringing, of nourishment, of care, then it's going to require a lot. And for those individuals, it's not a 12-week program,
No.
right? And that doesn't mean that you have to be in our containers for 12 weeks, but it does mean that you're going to um, once you have the awareness of where you're kind of running old patterns that aren't serving you, or whether you have tendencies that are actually not nourishing or supporting your health, you may find that it takes you a year, 2, 3 years to really truly reprogram that.
Yes.
And I think for individuals who are going through like the beginning process, just to know that that's okay.
Yeah.
It's like, it's okay if it takes a longer time. And I think in our culture previously, especially with diet culture, it was supposed to be a quick fix.
Yeah.
Like everyone wanted it to be fast. They wanted it to be 30 days, or that's what we were told that we should want, right? You want fast progress.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, you guys, fast progress generally isn't sustainable progress. So we talked a little bit about that today in our group coaching, that one thing that I've noticed at different stages of my body, it's still changing because, like 40s and now things just feel a little bit different. I'm like, I feel like I'm working with different puzzle pieces a little bit.
Yes.
But when I think about nutrition in my 30s, I would implement a nutrition strategy and I would see, feel, taste it in the first 4 to 7 days. I would be like, okay, I've reduced water retention. I feel this way in my muscle tissue. But of course, I knew which levers to pull. And so when I had a consistent intake and I was eating what I needed to eat for myself, I would see that over the course of 4 to 7 days from nutrition and water intake alone. I would know that. And then I was like, okay, well, for strength training, when I want to see the difference in my body in strength training, it really required an initial 6 weeks. Most people don't do the same thing for 6 weeks
Yeah.
in terms of their strength training. So they really never know what their training is actually doing if they're training the same type of workout, like progressive training, 3 to 5 days a week.
Right.
And if you really want to know what it looks like, you got to stick it out for 12 weeks. And most people never stick to something that long. Or if they do, that's all they do, and then they stop. But the power of compounding dividends, when you aren't expecting perfection, but instead working for longevity, the compounding returns are insane if you can just have a little patience. And our culture is so bad at this.
I mean, we just have to call it out.
Yeah.
We are so impatient, and you know, in a way, is it our fault? I don't know. We all have access to this technology, and
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a fault.
it's instant delivery. We're just a product of our environment right now, is
Yeah.
really what we're seeing. And so I was thinking about this the other day, of like, why do we run a business where we're teaching people like basic skills around food and eating? Like, shouldn't this just be something that we know how to do intuitively?
Mm.
And it really, what we're facing right now is that our DNA has really not changed much. There's been slight DNA changes, like over the last, I was reading, like, 5, 10,000 years, very small, but most of it hasn't. And yet our environment, our technology, how, our exposure of time outside versus inside, so many things have changed, like so insanely and so drastically that it's like we can't even keep up of the impact of all of that. And so really what we're teaching is like modern life requires modern skills for
basic
things.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about eating, sleeping, and moving, like basic
Yep.
human physical activities that you need to do for
Mhm.
survival. So it's really like, this abundance of access to all of this food. It's like there's so many more choices in our heads while we're also expecting things, as quick as like a DoorDash delivery.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating with your body. It's like, nope, it's still ancient DNA and it's not going to speed up.
Right.
And so I feel like where we're headed, of like people who are, it's like we either have to adapt our mindset and like really think about having more of a growth mindset, and we can talk about what that is, where we're intentionally and purposefully training our brains to, just delay that gratification wherever we can. Like we're going to have to purposefully implement our own kind of boundaries with technology and things like that, so that we can develop and foster and cultivate a little bit more of this patience. I think it's like it has to happen for us as a species, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think we're essentially helping people to do that within this process. And I also want to clarify, like, we are teaching some of the basics, but when we actually start teaching it, it's not actually basic. We mean basic, like we should learn this in first and second grade. We
Yeah.
mean that because it's almost like our belief, Lisa and I and our company, is like we should be learning this as one of our very first skills, learning
Yes.
how to understand what you're putting in your body. We now have the tools to track heart rate variability, our nutrition intake, the minerals that we're taking in, the pH of our urine, our blood glucose levels. Like, we have all of these metrics now that we can track, which for some people gets so confusing. It's really overwhelming for some, especially if they are technologically challenged.
Yeah.
And so even though we are teaching some of the basic principles, it's actually quite dynamic when you start to get into the nuance that might be necessary for you as an individual. These things are basic, but they're not necessarily simple when we're learning them after we've already had this foundation of beliefs that we're trying to repattern.
Yes.
So that part, it's like, yeah, we're teaching the basics, but it doesn't feel easy to teach sometimes because we're literally overriding a system.
Yeah, it's simple, but it's not always easy.
Yes.
You know, the foundation of nutrition science is pretty simple, but what's complex is if you walk into a grocery store, it's like, holy, like, whoa. I like, just think about what your parents' experience might have been like, or your grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there were like 2 potato options.
Yeah.
And it was, yeah.
Yeah.
Like there was one cracker company,
Right.
you know, it was,
Yeah.
we're really, everything has just come to this massive scale of overload, you know, of information access. I think also when you think about, you know, how our food has changed and how that can like impact some of our physiology, which can also impact our beliefs and our thoughts and whatnot, is like, you know, if we eat a lot of processed food growing up and don't get enough protein and we're eating a lot of high carb, you know, carbs on their own without some of these other nutrients, it impacts your emotional body, like you were saying. And so then you think about these big swings that can happen, and then, you know, it changes your taste buds. So a simple meal may not feel very nourishing at first because if you're used to eating like Honey Nut Cheerios all the time, and then you have like a very simple, you know, eggs, veggie frittata, and you're like, this is bland, you know? So there's so much cross connections there that we really are exploring this whole time through the program, which is really unique, you know. Like you're saying, it's the science of it that we're teaching is basic, but then it goes deep.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on what you're sharing, because for those of you who are listening, if you aren't aware that our taste buds can change based on our gut and the bacteria in our gut, it's a thing. So if you are growing up, like Lisa is sharing, with processed food as like your primary food source, or, you know, you're having your sugar cereals and your Coke and your Lay's potato chips and all of these things, and then you go to have a bowl of, you know, chicken and vegetables and some rice with like salt and pepper, you might be like, this is the worst meal I've ever had.
It's so funny because I'm like, that sounds amazing.
I know, totally. So, but what's interesting is that that's something that occurs also with an acid alkaline balance. And I have noticed it in my body for over a period of time. When I drink or consistently like focus on getting more vegetables in, my palate changes very fast. There's, I don't know if you guys know, is it Suja? Like the green drink. Anyways, there's like the greenest of green one. It's like celery and kale, and there's no fruit in it whatsoever. So when I drink those on a regular basis, sometimes I'll drink them in the morning with my, like right before my meal as like an alkaline thing.
Yeah.
And if I drink that after not drinking it for a month, it tastes like dirt.
What do you
Literally, I'm like, not my favorite taste. Now it tastes sweet,
Yes.
which is fascinating. So I just watch how my taste buds change based on what I'm putting into my body. And then if I haven't had sweets for a period of time and then I introduce sweets and I'm like, oh my God, let me go on a run and then I'm going to go to sleep. So for those individuals who are slowly moving into more whole foods and less processed foods, that's another thing that's going to take some time.
Yes.
It doesn't happen overnight, but you kind of have to stick with it for a period of time or else you're never going to go through the shift.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. And I think that's why having, a guide or a coach to tell you how long it's going to take is so helpful. So your brain isn't going to be like, oh my God, is it going to be like this forever? Because it's not. Temporary.
Yeah.
Some things will be compounding and be a great benefit. But I think a lot of times people will come in and they'll like be eating different foods, especially if they're thinking that they're going on a diet, and they will be like, oh, I don't like this. And, yeah, your taste buds are like, they're so used to chemical flavoring.
Yes.
That has been designed for you to want to continue to consume it. And it's very addictive.
Yes.
That's the purpose. This is not that. So I want to make sure that we also touch on in this conversation about health and stress. And I know it's like this whole separate topic, but I think we can do it a little bit. So this is something that I would love for you to kind of bridge us into the topic. When you think about people who come in with a stress response, and we're in this conversation of mindset. So when you see that people come in and they're in a heightened state of stress, how, from your perspective, does it have, like, how is it impacting their health overall?
Oh gosh, I'm just finishing up the an additional hormone certification, and the whole module was on stress and cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things that I think is helpful to consider is that stress isn't a feeling. It's not a feeling. And because when we ask clients, like, we check in with them every week, like, what are your stress levels this week?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them say, I don't know. Like, I don't feel stressed. And then they tell us about their week. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have 5 deadlines at work, your kid's sick and had to go to the ER, like all these things. And we're like, okay. And, asking just like a couple more questions. And then maybe it comes out like, oh, well, maybe I am stressed,
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, just knowing that stress is a physiological state. It's a high cortisol state in the body. When it's temporary, that's great. It serves a purpose. We are meant to have stressors, and a lot of that's how we've evolved. It's how every species grows. Without certain stressors, we don't evolve. I always like to think of our little butterfly, caterpillar to butterfly. It's like, if it doesn't have that time of cocooning and like the right inputs and its own kind of challenges for transforming, it won't turn into a butterfly. So there are absolutely, we have a stress response for a reason. It helped us evolve. It's really when it becomes chronic that it's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And hardest thing, well, 2 things. 1, women are more stress sensitive than men. And 2, when you're really used to something and you're just in this, you're in the kind of, I just picture like a little rat on the wheel. And that's what I was. And you're just going through the motions. Like, you're just not aware of maybe how stressed you are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not a feeling, right? And so when you get to that place where it becomes chronic, you're already working from kind of this like deficit of nourishment. And you really need to take a look back, like really just pausing. Like, if you can't even pause, maybe you're a little stressed.
Yeah.
Just pausing and taking a moment to assess all these things that I'm doing for my health. Are they serving me or not? So just as an example, and I was like, ooh, I've probably triggered so many clients today. Waking up at 5 a.m. to do a fasted HIIT workout for a lot of women as we get older on 4 hours of sleep, that doesn't outweigh the pros of that stressor, don't outweigh the lack of sleep that you're getting. You're probably better off like skipping that, on strength training when you can, and just integrating more walking into your life.
Yep.
And we as women have kind of fallen into this trap of the kind of like fast-paced hustle culture in the US, at least, which is really out of alignment with our hormones and physiology. And we feel like, no, we have to get it in, and it has to be this way. And then it's what we're doing and helping people is taking that pause, developing patience, cultivating awareness, and assessing, like, is this actually serving me? Are the pros outweighing the cons? Because a lot of healthy activities are stressors on the body.
Yes, absolutely. And so like kind of pulling that a little bit and expanding on what you're sharing for those of you who are listening. So when we think about like stress and our health, we talked about this with Coach Nate last time, which was really cool and helpful. And if you guys haven't checked that out, you should definitely check out that last podcast we did. So we have a number of different stressors that can occur in our body, right? We have physical stress that is natural. Like when we have a strength training scenario, we want to produce stress. Stress causes muscles to, break down, and then we repair, and that's how we get stronger. We need that stress. We also may need stress in other stressors in other areas of our life, like cramming for a test. If we didn't have that time of cramming, we may not know what we need to know. You kind of choose the stressor like you're talking about. But what we're finding and what you're speaking into, Lise, especially about women, and I love to touch on this topic because it feels like it feeds into the mindset that when we are so disconnected from whether or not we are taking the space that our body needs to rest and recharge to prepare for the next stressor, then for the most part, we're going to be more likely operating from unconscious behavior patterns. So when we are in a high stress state, naturally we're going to be triggering our nervous system to basically be in that the fight or flight, and the just running by the seat of your pants and trying to get everything done. And that, especially if it's chronic over time, doesn't allow for you to do this and look in and go, am I nourished? Is this nourishing me? Why am I doing this? Is this actually serving my goals? And so it kind of just brings us right back around to the nature that when we look at mindset, we're looking at, okay, what is the belief or the pattern that is running your life right now?
Yeah.
And how do we give you a little bit of space from that? Because what we notice, and we say this often, is that as we do one thing, we do all things. And the type of relationship that shows up with nourishment will show up in many other places. And most people have a hard time seeing that initially. It's like, it's like, look, the way that I stash food is also the way that I stash money.
Right.
Everyone may not be like that, but let me tell you, I stash stuff all over the place, and then I forget about it. And then later I'm like, oh my God, look at that. There's that thing there. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave it in your car. I'm very good to check the doors now. I'm like, oops, that melted.
Yes. Oh my God. It's so true. It's so, I know you, and I'm like, yes, you always have snacks, and then, keeping little money in certain places, different bank accounts or whatnot. Yeah.
I'll forget about it, and then I'll go like, oh my God, yay, snacks.
Totally. And like my past thing would be like, oh, there's a snack in my bag that is getting eaten immediately, after I put it in the bag, because it's like all consumption.
Right.
Right.
Yes. And then I bet if you got money
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you would spend that.
Oh, oh, yes.
Mhm.
A whole oh my god, the connection. We could do a whole course on just the connection between, like, food and money. It
Mhm.
is wild.
Mhm.
It was I couldn't hold it.
Mhm.
I couldn't hold either of them. It was like it was
Mhm.
there because that's kind of what to me, it's that's what I the undertone of what I've grew up with of where it's there, you're gonna consume it all at once because it might be gone.
Yes.
That's a very scarcity kind of approach, whereas you really have to cultivate a different mindset to be able to be like, "Nope, these cookies, this cake is actually always available. It's never a special occasion anymore." It's like,
Right. Yeah.
"You can
Yeah.
have this anytime, Lisa. Like, let's just check in and see, like, do you really want this right now? And how are you gonna feel after that?"
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. Mhm.
that is yeah, that is fascinating, really.
So for those of you guys still with us, I invite you to use one little strategy. I'm going to give you guys a practical strategy tool. And I love this because it kind of releases um, this from just being a conversation about food in terms of mindset. So, as one of the things that we love to give to individuals, especially as they're going through this, is we can look at food as being nourishing in a number of ways, right? So, we invite our clients to kind of look at, is this nourishing from an emotional perspective? Is it nourishing from nostalgia, right? We have like our favorite scone that so and so used to make, and we love having it. And so it's nostalgic, and we love that experience, and we hold a close place in our heart with that experience. Is it nourishing because we just depleted ourselves and we need to replenish from like a training? Is it nourishing from the standpoint of we just are hungry? It's time to eat. Like where is the nourishment coming from? That also can be applied to um, different things that you do throughout the week. Is this conversation nourishing? Is this type of music nourishing? Is what I'm watching on television nourishing? Is what I'm scrolling through social media nourishing? Like, does this, and you can swap, like, if nourishment isn't the word for you, maybe it's, does this provide grace for me? Does this feel peaceful? Is this allowing me to settle into my body in this way? And so maybe it's not only the word of nourishment, you can swap it for something. But I like to go, okay, what is the word that allows me to feel the most settled in
Mm.
my system? And whatever that is, it's like sometimes maybe the word is what allows me to feel the most embodied or powerful. And then I can move from that place and kind of go like with a plus or minus, how is this serving me in that way? And I think that general question just allows the mind to go into a feeling,
Yes.
and then allows us to get a little bit of space between a dialogue that might be happening, and then bring in that and see what shows up. And just that little adjustment, I think, can make such a big difference. Um,
Yes.
and you can choose your word. It doesn't have to be nourishment. It can be whatever you want it to be that feels like it's going to almost be an anchor for you, for
Mhm.
the feeling that you want to cultivate within your system.
Oh, I love that so much. It's such a also something that we should probably, teach our children, right? Or
Yes.
that we should have been taught. And,
Hmm.
and clearly some people have. But I don't think that it's any coincidence that we have really incarnated at this very monumental time of massive change where we're just kind of looking at all the things and we're like, well, I think we could do this better.
Yeah, absolutely. If there was nothing to fix, we would just be kind of bored.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. We really we picked a really fascinating time,
Mm.
and it's a it's just such an honor to be a part of this conversation and really helping people feel better. I mean, that's really what
Mm.
we're talking about here is through food, through mindset, what are these things that we can do to feel better? Because I always say, I'm like, we never have to apologize for wanting to feel better in our bodies. That's ultimately what it is, right? When people say, like, I want to lose 10 pounds or I want to build muscle, or I want to perform better, or I
Mm.
want more energy. It's like underneath all of that, we want to feel better because we walk around in these things all day, right?
Yeah.
And you think about like just the dialogue that you're having about and with your physical body, that's going to take up probably a lot of your reality and a lot of your thoughts. So you absolutely deserve, and we all deserve to feel good and amazing in our bodies. And that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. And the body wants to feel that way.
Yes. I
Yeah.
love that Nate said that the other
Mhm.
week. Like the
Yeah.
body, like it doesn't hate you, it's really, it wants to feel good. It wants
Yes.
to be nourished.
Yeah. And so it'll keep giving you the signs as to what path it needs to take to feel that way. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. We just got to listen.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, you guys. Well, if you made it this far, thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to chat about this, and there'll be more topics on this coming up as we're starting to dive into bringing somatic emotional release into our programs, more mindset work. We have a meditation course coming up. And also, if you guys are ready to kind of join the Awaken Your Nutrition program, Lise, what is the special that we have going on this month?
We have, if you join pretty much in the next 7 days, by September 30th, you get $500 off and a free hormones bonus training. So almost like a little sneak peek into Awaken Your Cycles, which is going to kick off here in the new year. So
Awesome. And for those of you who are kind of new to any of the hormone information that we have, please take advantage of this because it's again, it's like some of these foundational aspects that are, you could say, easy and simple. And once you know them, they make a massive difference for you, especially as females. So it's such a high value once you just can understand that the basics and the foundational principles there and then implement it. So it's a huge factor.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for joining. And if you didn't catch the whole thing, the replay will be up shortly. And we can't wait to see you guys next time. And we'll see you soon.